Hi Abby. It's been a while. We've known each other for about a year now, haven't we? I think.
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So back then, I think you had been agency side for a while since you graduated, worked your way up to director, and then we kind of chatted about wanting to experience a different, kind of different angle. Obviously, client side being that. And then around that time, that led to us kind of finding you that role at Cinch, where you've been ever since.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So for people that may not know, can you briefly explain a little bit about the company basically and what they do?
Yeah, of course. So Cinch is an online car retailer. So they're one of the first to basically provide end-to-end purchasing of a car online. So previously you have to kind of go to a dealer or a kind of third-party used car dealer. And Cinch are basically changing up the market. So you can browse for a car and purchase it all online without having to leave your home.
Amazing. And what kind of attracted you to your role then, or insight in general? What made you kind of want to do that switch?
So I guess in terms of insight in general, I always wanted to I was quite an inquisitive person. So when I first started out in my career, I'd kind of finished a degree in psychology and didn't really necessarily want to take it much further in the psychology space. I think it's probably fair to say that no one in the research industry grows up thinking they want to be a market researcher. But then kind of it came onto my radar and I thought it'd be really interesting. And almost 8 years later, here I am. And then in terms of kind of the recent switch, I'd always worked agency side, as you said. So I kind of wanted to see what the other side of the fence was like, being the client. I kind of thought it'd be a very different type of insight, a different type of way of using research. And I definitely think that was right. I've definitely learned a lot in the last year. But I wanted just to kind of change things up a little bit. As you said, I kind of worked my way up to director. So I'd spent around 7 years agency side, and it kind of got to the point where I just wanted to try something different. And really start to see a project through right from kind of beginning right through to the end. Obviously, when you're an agency, you deliver the project to the client, and then that's pretty much the end of it, really. But when you're client side, that's only just the beginning, and I wanted to be part of that and helping to embed that into the company. And I think Cinch particularly stood out to me because it was, as I said before, it was such a new brand that was really challenging the car buying market. It was something completely different, and I really wanted to be part of that. So although I'm not a huge petrol head or like massively into kind of the cars, like the whole brand and the ethos of Cinch was something that really excited me and really stood out to me.
So I'm currently working as a research insights manager at Cinch. So as a research team, we sit within the wider marketing team. So we work very closely with those in the marketing team. But we do work with lots of different teams across the business. So with the product team and the customer experience team. So making sure that our insights are getting to all parts of the business, really, and making sure that they're at the heart of all business decisions.
Okay, amazing. And do you think there are any other kind of roles in insight or research that could be transferable to your exact role that you're kind of working in now?
I think because there's so much variety within my current role, anyone with a strong research background would fit in quite well. That's something that I really wanted when I took this role, was the variety of it. And I definitely think it gets that. So having that kind of, 4 or 5 years experience, at least maybe, just to kind of have that over understanding of the industry, and ensuring that you have experience of project managing from beginning to end of a project, because a lot of the work that we do has we're such a small team. It's my responsibility to manage that project throughout, but also understanding the implications of the insights as well. So how to share that around the business and what the importance of those insights are, how they're going to affect the business, I think is really important. And for my specific role as well, obviously, I guess an understanding of the automotive industry is always a huge plus. I didn't have a great deal of knowledge of the automotive experience. I'd worked with a few clients in the past, just getting yourself up to speed on that. But I think that would be a huge plus, and it definitely has helped shape some of the insights that I've been able to share around the business.
Okay, and I'm sure it kind of varies day to day, but in terms of your kind of job responsibilities and the kind of questions that you're trying to answer, because obviously that differs from an agency perspective where there's loads of different things with different clients to it being with one kind of brand. What does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a mixture of working on kind of ad hoc projects, but also our brand tracker as well. So that's something that I really enjoy. Again, comes back to that variety of being able to have, experience of working with a tracker and helping that influence the business. That's something that's, really important to a lot of in-house roles, being able to manage that brand track and feed that in across the business. But as well as qual and quant experience as well. So I do a lot of work in kind of both methodologies, and I think that's something that is really important to have experience of going into this role as well. Also, in terms of my day-to-day, there's a lot of stakeholder management. So it's the same when you're in an agency. Obviously, you have the client management side of things, but just making sure that, you know, everyone's got a priority and they think there's the biggest priority. So being able to manage that is another part, a huge part of my job. So attending meetings and just finding out what the priorities are and what the business need is for them. I also spend a lot of time embedding research. So we may deliver a project, but then it doesn't just stop once you deliver that project. It's working with different teams to understand how they can use the insight, what we can do with it, what the implications are, and what we need to do in terms of informing strategy, or whether it's helping the product team to change something there. So taking our learnings across the business, really. I think it's probably kind of the typical skills for a researcher. So making sure you have that strong project management. As I said, like managing that project from end to end is something that's really important. So whether you're doing that all in-house or actually managing an agency as well. So I do a lot with agencies. So it's my responsibility to make sure that the project is running smoothly, even if it's something that's sitting with them at that time. So having that kind of end-to-end project management skills, but also that full service research skills if you are in-housing something. And as I said, I think experience of both ad hoc and tracker research is something that's really going to be beneficial. But also, as I said, that quant and qual experience as well, because there's no kind of quantity and there's no qual team in an in-house role.
In that sense,
Exactly.
Would you say, if someone did have more of one than the other, do you think it's kind of easy enough to pick up, or do you think that there's quite a lot of work to be done to be able to kind of get that mixture of both?
I think it really depends on the organisation you're going into. For me personally, I had a stronger quant background. So that was really beneficial for me because that was kind of the heart of the business, was the data. And a qual research I do have a little bit of experience on, and I think that's something you can sit on, you can help observe a little bit more. So I would definitely say if you're a full quality researcher, then maybe looking for an in-house role that offers quant might not necessarily be the right fit for you. But there are plenty of in-house roles out there that do want that quality experience. So definitely searching those out, I think, would be important.
So the point that you just made about the kind of working end to end and seeing that kind of, that kind of second half, the impact, is that the biggest difference that you would say that you've kind of faced from, like, moving from an agency to client side, or is there any other things that you didn't think would be that different but is?
Yeah, I think that probably is one of the big differences. Like, I think the project starts and ends very differently to when you're an agency. Obviously, when you're an agency, you kind of get given a brief, you deliver the project, you do the debrief, and that for the most part is pretty much it. Whereas client side, there is so much more that goes into even getting the brief to an agency. And then once you've had the debrief from the agency, actually then, as I said before, that is pretty much the start of it. And then you're working with the different teams internally to kind of help embed the research, inform strategy, inform decisions, make any changes that need to happen off the back of the project, really. I think in terms of other differences, there are quite a few, and I think I perhaps was a bit naive maybe to just how different it would be, and I mean that in a really positive way, almost, in that I've really enjoyed kind of everything that I've taken out from it. I think when you're working client side, you're focusing on one brand. So yes, there's lots of different demands from stakeholders and things are always changing, but you're all working towards that same common goal. Whereas when you're agency side, you have to kind of be able to switch your brain from lots of different clients. They all say their issues are really important, and obviously it really is important to them, but you're not able to prioritize in the same way that you can when you're working client side, because you know what the end business goal is. I think for me that was kind of quite nice in some way, just to be like, right, okay, I can see kind of a clear path and what we all need to be working on.
I guess you're all on the same mission in that sense, aren't you? Like, you're all striving for that thing together because you are working for the same brand. So it's
exactly.
In that sense.
And it's so nice to see how all the different bits piece together as well. Like when you're working with one team on one part of the business, then you might be working with another part, and actually that ends up joining up. So it's really, really nice. And I think I spent a lot more this year as well, thinking a lot more about strategy and frameworks as well, to then build that into the research brief. That's not something I'd done before. but that again, kind of working with the different teams, even from that beginning inception, like, oh, well, we're working with this team over here, they've done this, so you might be able to do that. And it just, again, working together. And I think probably the final big difference for me really was when you're working client side, kind of having to really strip back the presentation and the data that you're sharing. So when I was in kind of my agency roles, often when I'd come to debrief and present, I'd be presenting to insight teams kind of at the client. So they're very familiar with research, kind of very research savvy. But when you're client side, you're often sharing insights around the business with people who may not be as close to the project, or actually research at all may not understand it in the same way that kind of insight teams do. So it's really important not to alienate them, and sometimes actually taking a few steps back and really stripping out the kind of the data and what it really means and what are the key data points that we need to land the message, and not worrying about everything else. I think when you're working in an agency, we get into quite a bad habit of just shoving all the data at the client because you paid for this, you need to see everything. But actually that's not the case. What's the most pertinent points? And obviously client side, I know what that is, because again, going back to that common goal, I know what the business is trying to achieve. So really, I think kind of getting to know better what your clients want when you're agency side will really help you to kind of tailor those insights a bit better.
Definitely, that sounds really good. And are there any kind of myths about the profession that you can discuss, or anything that you might have heard that, you know, about moving client side and that kind of thing, that and what your experience of that has been in reality?
I think kind of the theory around client side is that it's a much easier life. I think it's probably a real myth. I mean, yes, as I said, like it's easier in as much as you are all focusing on that same common goal. You've got one brand to worry about. But you still have so many different stakeholders coming towards you. And I think one of the things that I found agency side was that, you know, so many different client demands coming my way, and you know, lots of different queries, and it kind of never ended. Actually, when you're client side, often that's still the case. It's just stakeholders that you've got coming to you from around the business. It's not just different clients, it's just stakeholders have different demands, and they all have their different needs. Obviously, they have things they need to achieve and deadlines and targets they need to meet. So you're almost like a little mini agency within a client, if that makes sense. And I think people do think that clients do get a much easier life, and I think that probably is a myth. I think, you know, yes, it is easier in a lot of ways, but again, it still has its challenges, like all roles. And for me, that's something I really enjoy. Like I like kind of the fast-paced nature of working and having lots of things to focus on. But I wouldn't say go for a client-side role if you're going for an easy life, because that's not the case. No.
What about like length of projects? Because obviously agencies, you know, you can have quick, ad hoc, fast turnaround, then you can get the longer ones. Is it similar in that sense as well, or is there a difference there?
Yeah, I think it depends on the business really, and what their needs are at the time. Like, yes, I guess when you're working agency side, some clients only kind of want to outsource the more strategic projects. And actually, when you're working client side, sometimes those tactical projects might be done a bit more internally. So you still do get both. I think in terms of the actual project length though, like, yes, it is longer client side, because as I said before, you're doing all of that upfront stuff, and then you're doing everything in the embedding. So the project isn't a 6-week proposal through to debrief. It's a maybe 3 to 6 month, let's find out what the business problem is, how do we want to tackle it, let's then go away and run the research. Now we need to debrief it and help the teams embed it into their different areas. So I do think when you're agency side, particularly sometimes if things have been taking a little while, you can kind of get a bit of project fatigue. And I'd say if that's you, then probably client side isn't right, because things do take so much longer, just because of the nature of the role and the difference that it is to agency side.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I think that's helpful for people to know, especially if they are doing those lengthier projects and, you know, not wanting to kind of wait around for that kind of thing. But no, that's interesting. And is there any kind of advice that you would give to others that are kind of looking at, you know, getting into your area of insight, you know, the sector in particular, or just, you know, a client side role in general?
I think in terms of client side role in general, it's important to work for a brand that you really care about, or that genuinely interests you. It's not like an agency where for the most part anyway, you can work on lots of different brands. So whilst I really enjoy my role, there's lots of variety in it. That may not be for everyone, and I definitely would say don't go into a brand that you don't believe in or you don't align with your values, because ultimately that's all you're focusing your energy on all day, every day. And I think for me, as I kind of mentioned up front, I'm not a petrol head, I'm not a huge car enthusiast, I know a little bit about them, but for me, that's why Cinch excited me, because of the brand, the Cinch brand, and what it stood for, and the exciting nature of it being that kind of that scale up business almost, finding something that generally interests you. I think in terms of the roles as well, you have to really persevere. I know we've kind of had quite a lot of these conversations like last year around kind of, not client-side roles are a lot harder to get. There's fewer of them around. There's a lot more agency roles available. So don't be too disheartened by all of the kind of rejections and things that you might get, because there's just so many people going for one role, but keep persevering with it, because the right role will be out there for you. And I think when applying for jobs as well, I mean, when you're kind of writing your cover letter or your CV, obviously this is stuff that you guys say all the time, but really kind of making sure that if you are making that switch or want to make that switch to client side, that you're thinking about what they actually want from that candidate. So really understanding kind of commercial outcomes, and that showing that about insights really only being one part of making meaningful change. There's lots of other teams that you'll be having to work with. So really understanding that you have knowledge of that, and demonstrating kind of how you've championed the voice of the consumer or the customer within a business, and kind of managing stakeholders. As I said, that's something that's been really quite pivotal to my role. So even if you don't have direct experience of these sorts of things, really showing kind of how the experience you do have can apply to that. So when I was looking, kind of a lot of the clients I'd worked with, I've gone and sat in their offices when I was working agency side. So using that experience to my advantage and showing kind of what I learned from that, I think probably really helped. And then in terms of getting into the sector, I think, companies like Cinch, more and more kind of companies that are kind of fully online are cropping up, whether that be within the car industry or other industries. And I definitely think it's an exciting one to go for, and just kind of communicating the benefits of what that brings to customers' lives, I think will be really key for success, really.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And there was something I was thinking about when you were talking about that is, kind of move to kind of client side. A lot of these roles that do come up, they say, or they at least want someone that's got that experience with, being working closely with stakeholders, or a secondment, or that kind of thing. That's kind of, you've stepped into an office, you've really worked closely with them on a long-term project, and it can be quite disheartening for candidates that potentially have come from an agency, haven't quite been able to do that just yet. So the step between, feels like quite a big one. But as you were saying, I guess using those transferable skills and being able to really kind of say, okay, well, I've done this, I've worked closely with this client, whether it be in the similar sector or, they have the same morals or that kind of thing, really being able to showcase that is definitely a help, because that, there are transferable skills, aren't there, and you can definitely learn and develop them through kind of working closely with people. So no, definitely. Okay. And how do you see insight developing, with the profession in the future?
Yeah, I think it's an industry that's always changing. Isn't it? If I think back to when I first started, it's very different to where we are now. I think in the future, it's really hard not to talk about AI at the moment. It's such a hot topic. Not just within the profession, but just everywhere. It's touching all parts of our lives. So I think kind of have to mention that, really. I think in terms of how it's going to affect the research industry, I think there's a couple of ways, I guess. It could be an opportunity to give an initial read or sense check on things before kind of throwing 100 grand at a project. Kind of as a client side researcher, thinking about how could we use AI just to sense check before we put those briefs out and kind of spend a whole load of money could be one way. And also kind of automating those more menial tasks, because a lot of, particularly agency side, when you're looking at kind of like data checking or anything like that, I'm sure AI is going to become a lot more prominent in that space as well. For me, I don't think it's ever going to replace research. I think there's a lot of fear around AI at the moment. I hope it doesn't replace research, otherwise that's me out of a role. But it's really about understanding how it's going to complement our roles. And I think, don't be scared about it. It can make things so much easier, much more efficient. How do we kind of manage and channel the positives of AI really to kind of make for a positive change? I know a lot of people are talking about it in the industry much more eloquently than I ever could, so I won't go too much more into it, but I definitely think it's going to be interesting just to see the direction in which AI takes the industry.
Yeah, definitely. I think change is always a scary thing, isn't it? Everyone always wonders how it's going to work, and when you rewind back, we won't talk too much about COVID times, but rewind then, and we're all working from home, and it was such a change, and we were like, how are we ever going to do it? And then things kind of moved online, and we're so used to Zoom now, and we're able to be much more kind of present online, which reaches kind of further audiences, and we've kind of just adapted because we had to. So it's one of those things, isn't it, where you can kind of worry about these kinds of new tech coming in and AI taking over, but actually kind of flipping that, and how can it actually help us, and how it will progress the industry, as opposed to kind of taking a step back. It's exciting. It will introduce new things, and with that comes change, but I guess that's not necessarily for the bad, right? So definitely. But that's really, really, really helpful, and I think it's great to kind of chat about, I guess, for people that wanting to make that move. It seems quite a daunting one. So don't always necessarily know where to start with that kind of transition, but I think you've made it sound exciting, and I think if someone's really interested and invested in a brand, then it's definitely a good switch.